All right, we have 4 o'clock. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Dr. Aguilar, do you have any opening comments?
I do. I just wanted to offer to the board, we spent one budget workshop last week looking at the budget. I've looked again at the cost centers, and I feel confident that we can cut a small amount of money out of the supply budget in the general fund. The total amount of money for supplies is about $170,000. I'd like to offer to the board that we will reduce the supply budgets across the board by 10%, which would save the general fund $17,000.
To 153. Is that all you have, Dr. Aguilar?
Yes, sir. I do have a couple of instances where a preliminary decision was made to reduce the number of ESL positions in next year's budget. We were projecting needing 7 additional positions. The conversation shifted to cutting 2. So I want to call to the board's attention, one of the reasons we have additional MFP dollars in the budget is because of the extra weighting, particularly from ESL students. So I would urge the board to try to restore those teacher positions, if possible, in the Scenario 2 budget.
Okay. Anything else?
No, sir.
All right. Then we move on the agenda. Review of budget recap and timeline. Mr. Guidry.
Okay, this is the meeting of May 10th. It's a continuation of our meeting from May 5th. And our goal is to complete review of the group insurance and general fund. And that would move us to the May 12th meeting, which is Thursday of this week, 5:30 p.m., where we'll bring all of the budgets back for one last review. And on that evening, we'll ask the board for permission to move forward with the budget adoption process. If the board so approves, then we'll get started with the public advertisement and public inspection period. If they need another meeting, we do have an optional meeting on May 17th to allow us to conclude. And then that would be followed by public advertisement May 18th and 19th, public inspection May 18th through June 1st, public hearing at 4 o'clock on June 1st, followed by a special board meeting to adopt the budget at 4:30. So this is a timeline that we're currently operating under. Ask if they have any questions or comments.
No, sir.
Okay, we're ready to move on to agenda item number 2 was group insurance fund proposed budget. At our last meeting, we reviewed it, and there were no questions then. I would ask if there are any questions now before we proceed to the review of the proposed general fund budget.
I'm sorry.
This is a procedural question. Are we supposed to make motions to accept these budgets or no? I know this is a board meeting and not a workshop, so.
We're requesting that the board approve the proposed budget, which basically will be the springboard for us to come back. We'll know that this is the budget. We need to come back on the 12th and present one final time before we open it up for public inspection. So we would ask for a motion that the board approve the proposed budget or provide recommendations for changes.
Do we need what about the timeline? Do we need a motion on the recap timeline?
That was the review, so we're good there. It was just a review
Okay.
of the timeline.
Well, Mr.
Mr.
President,
Centennial?
I move that we approve the proposed group insurance fund budget for 16-17.
Okay, second by Mr. Knizik.
I do second. I have a question.
You have a question?
Mr. Gidry, can you explain which line items are relatively new for the ACA? Is it PPACA assessments and fees?
Yes.
Is that all? Because I remember we had a discussion that it was on the order of $1 million, and I'm talking about the Affordable Care Act.
That's the only line item that I see. I'm not aware of any other line items that it might be included in. Ms. Bernard can comment on that.
The assessment did go down for the reinsurance fees. So we are assessed like so much per covered member by the federal government to fund the reinsurance for the exchange, basically. And that assessment went considerably down for next year. So we won't pay as much. That's why you see a lesser amount. But that should be where we capture all of the real fixed costs that were assessed for PPACA.
Okay, but the previous year was on the order of
Yes, sir. It certainly was.
$1 million. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Comments from members of the public? Yes, ma'am.
It is now. Thank you. Two questions. The $400,000 that's going into the OPEB trust is predominantly employee insurance premium money, I assume. Have the employee insurance committee folks been able to review this before you adopt it?
Actually, I think the premiums are roughly 2/3, 1/3. So the board puts the majority of the funds that are reflected in the revenue section. But to answer your question, it hasn't been presented to the insurance committee, but we have had a previous meeting, a public meeting, where anyone would have been welcome to attend and comment.
Ms. Mounts, I'll say that I asked this question last week about what should have been, what would we like in a field of gold to put into the OPEB
10 to 12
account?
million, yeah, I heard.
And $400,000 is basically what we can
Understand.
scrounge together.
But other parishes who are also concerned about their bond ratings, do they put money into the OPEB trust to the extent that we have?
To my knowledge, there are 3, maybe 4 other school districts, and it ranges anywhere from DeSoto Parish that has fully funded their OPEB liability. With regards to the others, we're probably doing as well, if not better, with regards to the amount we have in that trust.
Any other comments, questions? If not, Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote.
Six, 4, none against.
Thank you. Motion carries. Mr. Gidry, preliminary report, budget summary, projected revenues and expenditures.
Yes, this is for the proposed 2016-17 general fund budget. With regards to the format, we have a summary that was distributed. Do all board members in the media have a copy? It compares the original scenario 2 from the 5-5 meeting, the May 5th meeting, to the revised scenario 2, which allows for the adjustments that was discussed during the 5-5 meeting. So that'll be our starting point, and then from there we can go into the detail, as much detail as the board members would choose to do so. So with that said, in looking at the comparison, side-by-side comparison, I would ask the board to note that in the first section, the difference there is a reduction in the number of teachers, ESL program teachers slots being added from 7 to 5. I believe this is the line item that Dr. Aguilar requested that we discuss and possibly restore that reduction of 2. And I would think that would maybe go towards the appeals line item, Dr. Aguilar. So the funding for it, so that it would have no impact on the bottom line, should the board choose, is we would restore that the number being added. So instead of 5, it would be 7. Everyone see it's the last line item in the first section under instructional. It's showing a difference of $134,000. Everyone see that in the comparison? So basically, if the board's in favor of it, we would change the 5 to 7 and basically reduce the 30 under appeals, which is 3 line items right above it, to 28.
Ms. Morris, you,
And Mr. Guidry, at this point, would we need a motion to make those changes, or just a reference or a recommendation from the board on that particular issue?
Well, what we can do, if the board so chooses, is I'll make a note of it, and when we get to the very end, if the board so chooses to adopt revised scenario 2 with the following adjustments, we could include it then.
And I would also like to propose that we add back in or restore the 4 school security officers to the high schools. After speaking to the principal of Como, and I believe some of the other principals are here, those positions are critical for maintaining discipline in the schools. And I think it's important, especially with the recent results showing the increase in our graduation rate, that we allow the schools to continue to maintain that discipline so we can continue that forward progress.
Mrs. Centeni?
Might I suggest that we actually make motions and vote? It might end up being a little more efficient than, might actually end up having a majority vote for the budget at the end of everything.
All right, then I'll make a motion that we restore the 4 school security officers into the general budget.
I'll second.
Okay, so the motion is to restore the 4 security officers, school security officers. You want to take the second language teachers separate? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Latchley. Oh, I didn't see him. You know, the peripheral vision? Any questions or comments concerning the addition of the, re-adding of the school security officers back in the budget from members of the audience? Members of the board? Yes, sir, Mr. Centeni.
I don't have my sheet from last week. How many and how much?
4.
It's not on here now.
I think it's 4.
Mr. Angel,
Yes, sir.
just for your information, that's miscoded on that summary sheet. The cut that was made to the SSO line item rather than the SRO. So rather than it showing up as school resource officers, a cut, should have been listed under school security officers. Originally 6, the board cut 4. The request now is to restore those 4 positions.
Mr. President, I can
Yes.
answer his question. It's 4, and there were 6, so if we average it out, it's 232,000, Mr. Centani. But I do have a question, Ms. Morris. Since this is being recommended to be restored, this is obviously a regression of, the progress we were trying to make. So what are we going to trade off here?
Well, and we didn't get to this yet, but I understand from Mr. Centani that we've found some additional funds from the fuel cost funds that weren't used because of the drop in the gas prices of, $500,000, Mr. Centani? Thereabouts. So that's going to, and there's some other additional savings that Mr. Centani found while reviewing the general fund, so.
Mr. Latchley?
If you look at last week's budget, in scenario, in option 2, they were included. So if we would have okayed option 2 and not touched the SSOs, they'd have been there anyway.
Right, and that,
So it's not like we're putting anything, but we're just putting it back the way it was.
Right, the way it was
Right.
before we changed it. We changed it.
I was not in favor of changing it. Was going to bring it up today because my high school, the one we have, is a very productive individual, and I don't see the need to cut it when it was already an option 2 already. And I let it go last week, but I was going to bring it back up. I didn't see the reason of taking it out. It's not necessary. Better to have them in the schools, in my opinion.
Mr. Centeni?
Ms. Morris, would you consider withdrawing your motion for the time being so that we could actually cut the money first, if the board chooses to do so? I certainly wouldn't want to put you all in a bind of having to vote for a cut to pay for something else.
well, I agree with Mr. Lashley on this. If you looked at scenario 2 from last week as it was presented, then we were not having to dip into our 3 months fund. We were still in the excess part of that. So I think that if we just went back to the original scenario 2 and adopted that the way it was, even without the 2 cuts to the appeals that we talked about a few minutes ago, then we're okay with the budget. But I think that, I'm okay with withdrawing my motion for now if we're able to talk about those additional changes at this time rather than waiting for the later. But I think that we can also talk about additional cuts to the appeals if necessary to kind of balance that out.
Is that a withdrawal of your motion?
Sure.
Madam Secretary, you understand? Yes, sir. Withdrawing your motion.
For now.
Okay with the second, I assume? Okay.
Well, so I guess
Mr. Centeni?
so I guess this presents an issue because the cost centers are spread out over the meeting. One is in 1,200, one is in 13, and 2 are in 1,300, where we have fuel costs and supplies.
Yeah, we can bring him up right now.
That's fine with me if you'd like to do that.
Sure.
So we'll do the 1,200. So I'll move that we reduce the fuel cost line item in cost center 1231 by $172,000.
I'll second.
I didn't email it to you. The motion is to reduce the fuel cost line item in cost center 1231 by $172,000.
And we have a second. Any questions or comments from any members of the public? Any members of the board?
I will comment if you'd
Yes, sir.
like. So I noticed that we spent about half of our budgeted money for this year, this fiscal year so far, and we still have 3 months left. But it's evidently due to low fuel prices, lower than we budgeted. So fuel prices, while they have gone up, they haven't returned to what they were. So I feel it would be appropriate to go ahead and budget a little more realistically for what we think fuel prices will be.
Any other questions or comments? If not, Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote. do you want to continue? And Mr. Centeni, and is it 1,300?
Six, four, none against.
Okay, motion carries.
Mr. President, I'd move that we reduce the operational reimbursement for regular ed line item in cost center 1309 by $200,000.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second.
Operational reimbursement, regular education,
I think he said 9.
1309.
1309.
Is the cost center.
Item 9 and 1300. Any questions or comments from members of the public? Any questions from members of the board?
This
Yes,
is,
sir.
Mr. President, this is the same line item for contract bus drivers. The prior motion was for board-owned buses.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? If not, Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote.
Did they vote on that? Supplies? 172? 17,000.
Six, four, none against.
Comments of Dr. Agnew.
Yes, sir, Mr. Centeni.
Last one, Mr. President. I move that we reduce the tech materials and supplies line item in cost center 1309 by $100,000.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion. Would you repeat that, please, Mr. Centeni?
That
I
is
thought we
the-
just went over 1309.
This is a different line item in 1309.
Okay.
This is tech materials and supplies in the same cost center.
Okay. And we have a second. Any questions or comments from members of the public?
Oh, well, we want you.
Any questions or comments from members of the board? Yes, sir, Mr. Hidalgo.
What's the reduction?
The reduction is by $100,000 for a line item where they had $100,000 budgeted this year and spent zero.
Any other questions or comments? Members of the board, if not, Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote.
Six, four, none against.
Okay, motion carries. You want to, Mr. Guidry, do we need to go back to 1,200?
Well,
Or-
what I'd like to do is just go over each range, ask if there's any questions, beginning with the 1100s. It should go quickly, I believe.
Ms. Morris?
Well, I'm going to go back to my motion now to add those 4 school security officers back into the budget. That was for 4 at 232 or 58,000 per position.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second that we in fact put those 4 security officers back.
Are we still in 2.3? Is that where I would take my motion at?
Yeah, we're going back to,
2.3, okay.
yes, ma'am.
And we have a second. Do we have any questions or comments from members of the public? Members of the board? Yes, sir, Mr. Hidalgo.
Yes, Dr. Aguilar, when we last met and we were looking at the last proposal, the school security officers were not included in scenario 2. I understand that, but if we remember correctly, I suggested that we approve scenario 2 with 4 of the 6 cut out of the proposal. My question to you, and at the time, before I made that proposal, I asked you if the school security officers were on campus alone or if they were in addition to school resource officers, and I think Mr. Craig answered that they're in addition to. So my question is, it seemed like a dire necessity coming from Mr. Lachele, and I just would like to know, maybe I see a couple of principles here. Since the school resource officer is already on campus, why do we need the school security officer, and what exactly is their function? I mean, are they performing the same duties as a school resource officer, or are they performing other duties?
So in a nutshell, the school safety officers deal with administrative issues, and the school resource officers deal with criminally related issues.
Okay, so a school resource officer is a police officer dealing with his or her
Violations
field of work.
law. Yes, sir.
And a school security officer is an officer of some kind dealing with an administrative issue that maybe administrators should be dealing with?
Yes, sir. All of the SSOs have military or police backgrounds training. Some of them are actually licensed to carry a firearm, but in their capacity as an SSO, they do not carry a weapon. They deal with the administrative issues, the cell phones, the skipping class, the taking off, leaving campus without permission. They deal with those things which aren't necessarily criminal in nature.
Okay, well, for the record, this is not close enough to the classroom for me, even though I'm going to be in the minority, so thank you.
Any other, Mr. Lachele?
Can I ask a question? Why cut 4 and leave 2? Why does one school's SSO more important than another one? That's what I have to know.
Okay.
I've seen the SSO in action because I spent a lot of times in my schools, a lot of time. And it's a position that is needed. It's a position I'm going to vote to keep. And I've seen what this gentleman does. So why can one school have 2 and 4 schools have none?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I don't understand.
So every campus has an SRO.
Not every campus. High schools and middle schools, yes, sir.
Correct. So on high school and middle school. So there are 6 SSOs, and they are
At the high schools.
at the high school.
Yes, sir.
And so, but every high school has an SRO.
All the traditional high schools have an SRO and an SSO.
Okay, well, my recommendation, I'll be happy getting rid of all 6 of them. There was discussion on the board floor, welcome to pull the video up, there was discussion on the board floor from another board member who appealed for 2, and at the time I had no problem with it, but if you'd like a motion for all 6, I'll make it.
Nope. I want a motion to keep all 6.
Well, we already keeping 2. The motion is to add 4 back, correct? For a total of 6. Ms. Morris?
And I'm in support of keeping all 6, but to refer back to last week's meeting, the 2 that we kept were for NP Moss, which is a different situation. It's our only K through 12 school, and every single child there has some discipline issues. And so they're going to be short 2 teachers, I think, that were retiring and not being replaced. And so they do need all the help that they can get to maintain their discipline, but also to maintain their growth, which has been slow but steady.
Well,
So
thank you
that
for
was-
clarifying.
yeah.
I remember there was a discussion about it, and you jogged my memory. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to,
Mr.
in
Angel.
fact, maintain, I guess, as of today, all 6 security officers. You want to speak to that motion, sir?
Yes, sir. I'm David Lejeune, principal at Acadiana High. I just want to say that our safety officer, he is a vital part of basically, our number one priority at our school is safety. We got roughly 2,000 people that show up to school every day. And like Mr. Craig said, our SRO basically handles criminal things. Well, he is not always on campus. If there is a criminal issue, he has to bring someone to juvenile. He has to go to court for things. We have to have an officer on campus for the safety of our kids. I mean, I tell our parents every day, every time, that our number one priority is safety, and he does handle administrative duties and that includes things like walking the halls every hour, checking bathrooms every hour, checking the campus every hour to make sure that everything is secure, parking lots, and just if our SRO with 2,000 people, he can't handle it by himself. There's just no possible way, and we do appreciate having the SSO, because in the 29 years I've been in education, schools have changed, the campuses have changed, society has changed, and if we're going to keep the dangers of society off of our campuses, we do need extra help every day on campus.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Mary Saunier. I'm principal at Como High School. I agree with everything that Mr. Lejeune says, but our SSO not only complements our SRO, but they go into the classrooms if we need them. They diffuse situations. I've had some go in classrooms when teachers are running late. We have been short a clerical person. My SSO is at the front desk answering the phones, printing IDs. So they do a lot more than just, the stuff that an SSO is required. They go beyond that. So our SSO walks the halls, gives out tardy slips, does whatever we ask her to do. She diffuses situations. She does whatever we ask her to do. So I am in agreement with Mr. Lejeune. It is for the safety of our kids. We have 2,000 kids on our campus. One SRO cannot do the job by himself. We need two. Thank you very much for listening.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Julia Williams. I'm the principal at Northside High School. I again agree with what both of my colleagues have said. Something else I want to bring to attention is all of our campuses are huge, no matter the number of students that are within our school, and having those two people on campus assist us. There are backup in situations that we may need different assistance with the backgrounds that they have than what we can provide ourselves.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from members of the public? Members of the board? Yes, sir. Mr. Knezik?
First, I just want to say I'm going to vote in favor of keeping this funding. But Dr. Aguilar, I would just like to, we've talked about this before, just reiterate that I believe our charter and our obligation is to educate children, and we have a limited amount of resources and a limited amount of local, state, and federal tax dollars that we use to educate those children. I do believe that there are other organizations like the sheriffs and local municipalities that are chartered with protecting and serving us, and I believe that extends into our schools as well. So I would like us to continue to explore better relationships to where the police fully fund their requirement to protect and serve us in in our schools. I think that when the police, if they need more money, if the police need more money to protect us in this building or in our other 40-something buildings, then the police can seek more funding from their constituents and their taxpayers to do their job, because it's their job to protect us. Our job is to educate the kids. So I just like to continue, reiterate if we can explore those and then even support them in their own initiatives. Maybe they need to go out for a tax initiative or figure out the funding in their programs and figure out what resources they have available for funding to pay for police protection in our schools. So, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote.
Five for, one against.
Okay, motion carries. Mr. Guidry? I'm sorry, Ms. Morris?
I'd like to move that we restore those two ESL teachers and reduce the appeals from 30 to 28.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion that we restore the two ESL teachers, and the second by Mr. Lechley. Any questions or comments from members of the
Restore
audience?
2 ESL teachers and
Reduce the appeals from 30 to 28.
Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Mr. Latchley, members of the board, you have any questions? If not, Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote.
Six for, none against.
Okay, Mr. Guidry, you could continue.
Okay, in any other line items in the,
Yeah, Mr. Centeni?
Mr. President, I move that we return the 11 positions being moved to the 2002 sales tax fund to the general fund.
Would you repeat that motion, please?
I move that we return the 11 positions being moved to the 2002 sales tax fund: elementary school class size reduction teachers, middle and high school class size reduction teachers, and science lab teachers from the 2002 sales tax fund to the general fund.
I will second.
And that's a second, that's what I was waiting. Okay, second by Mr. Knezik. Do we have any questions or comments from any members of the audience? From any members of the board? Mr. Hidalgo?
Mrs. Centani, would you mind if I asked you for a brief explanation? My appreciation of the administrative rule is that the intent for this was to reduce class sizes. Elementary school class size reduction teachers, middle school class size reduction teachers. I'd like to know where you're heading, I guess, before we take a vote.
I don't disagree that the administrative rule allows us to reduce class sizes, but I also strongly feel that the 2002 sales tax was never meant to be a supplement to the general fund, as in when times got tough, we moved more and more full salaries into it. If there's a difference of opinion, that's fine, but this is my personal opinion. I feel, once again, that if we value something, we should put it in the budget and pay for it. That's the reason.
Yes, sir. I don't disagree. I guess my only concern is that over the years, many positions have actually been taken out of the 2002 tax fund that were being funded there to reduce class sizes through attrition. Teachers leave. Those positions get replaced, and then they get moved into the general fund. So I would say the opposite holds true. Many more positions have been sucked out of that fund, and thus the balance is in them. So, I think it's great. The 14 check is great, but the intent of it, it just seems we're moving further and further away, and I just have a concern about if they're meant to reduce class sizes, not other special positions.
Any other questions or comments? Madam Secretary, call for the vote. We're in voting mode.
3 for, 3 against.
Motion fails. Okay. Mr. Guidry, you want to continue unless we have any other motions from the floor? Mr. Guidry?
okay, if there are no other questions with regards to the comparison of scenario 2 and revised scenario 2, I would like to proceed through the cost center series and ask if there are any questions in any particular group, and I'll begin with the 1100s. So at this time, I'd ask board members if there are any questions or comments with regards to the detailed proposed budgets for the 1100 series cost centers.
No, sir.
Moving forward, are there any questions or comments with regards to the detailed proposed budgets for the 1200 series cost centers?
When we get to
Let me digress. I was reminded by Ms. Morris, and I agree. Do we have any comments from the public on the 1100 series? I would also accept any comments from the 1200 series. Members of the board on the 1200 series. Okay, Mr. Guidry.
Ask if there are any questions or comments with regards to the 1300 series cost centers.
Same thing. Any members of the public have any comments on the 1300 series?
Mr. Angel.
Yes, sir.
So the board chose to move $100,000 from cost center 1309. Mr. Evans is driving a bus. He did text Mr. Craig that $100,000 is in the budget to fund the Edulog for this upcoming school year. Even if we buy a new piece of software, it has to run concurrently with Edulog. So I would caution you to reconsider that $100,000 savings because we need Edulog.
Yes, sir. Mr. Centeni?
So we spent, why didn't we need it this year? Because that was the reason I zeroed in on that particular line item was because $100,000 was.
Yes, sir. And
budgeted,
I was
spend it.
with you. We just need to be careful that we're trying to get an answer to that.
Well, let's do this then, because by my count, we started balanced, we cut 489,800, and we added back 232. So we still have $257,000. Why don't we do it later when Mr. Evans can be here?
I do believe in the current year, the bills for the scenarios they've run have not been paid yet. So that would explain why the 100,000 hadn't been expended. I don't think we'll use a full 100, but it's in the 90s. That would explain that why it's still zero at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Aguilar. Okay, Mr. Guidry?
So would we need a motion at this point to add it back?
We'll wait.
Okay.
We'll wait. We're still a couple of 100,000 over, so we're going to wait and see.
Okay, any questions or comments with regards to the 1400 series of cost centers?
Any comments from members of the audience on the 1400 cost center? Board members? Proceed.
Any questions or comments on the 1500 series of cost centers?
Any questions or comments from the audience on the 1500 cost center series? Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if it's the appropriate time, Tommy. I may should have asked it earlier. But as I appreciate it, the $5 million that you're using to pay for fiscal year 15-16 that's coming out of the reserve, and then you're taking another $5 million of non-recurring revenue to pay for recurring expenses in next fiscal year. Is that correct? So that leaves you a reserve, general fund reserve, of less than $250,000, except for the 200 plus that Justin's got right now. Is that correct?
Well, it leaves us with approximately $247,000 of unassigned fund balance.
Right.
That
That's
unassigned fund balance is over and above.
The 66.
Yes, ma'am. That is correct.
So my question is, the budget revisions that were passed last fiscal year, did they exceed $247,000?
Well, when you say last year, you're referring to the year that was
15-16, correct.
the budget adjustments that have been made are included in the $5 million that's estimated as being used for 15-16.
Right, but the total of those, the point I'm getting to is if your reserve is diminished to the point of 247,000, do you expect budget revisions for 16-17 to exceed it?
Well, one of the main reasons, there's no way to tell, but one of the main reasons we had significant budget adjustments in the current year were mainly due to the reduction in sales tax revenues. We have incorporated, or we have reflected those expected decreases in the proposed budget. Unlike the 15-16 budget where we did not, in the 16-17 proposed budget, we have anticipated continued decreases. So that would be one large budget revision that we would not anticipate making during the 16-17 school year.
And you're anticipating an increase in property tax, correct?
That's correct. In the property taxes, keeping in mind that when we adjust the current budget, which was basically the 14-15 collections when we're preparing the 15-16 budget, we actually are recognizing not only the actual collect increase that we experienced in the current year, we're also projecting an increase for next year. So of the $8 million increase that we're projecting, a little over $5 million we've actually collected in the current year, and we're projecting roughly about a $3 million increase next year, 4.5% increase, which is slightly less than the 5% increase that was the projection from the tax assessor's office.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
If you don't mind, I would like to go back and refer to something in the 1200 cost center.
No, ma'am. We don't mind.
Okay. I know, and there's a proposal for eliminating 4 social workers in the school system. I would like to take the opportunity to just share with you and remind you of a few of the things that the social workers do in the school system. Last year, there were 4 social work positions that were cut and 7 that were moved back to people appraisal, making it more of a challenge for the social workers still in the system to provide the services that these children need. We wear a lot of hats in the school system as we provide services to those students with Tier 3 interventions. They are faced with the most challenging behaviors of the kids in the school system. We also act as the liaison between the schools and the outside agencies that are providing services to students in our schools. We provide services to students with social work services on their IEP. When that could be individual therapy, it could be group therapy, it could be family therapy. We have to do our best to assess where that need is for that student. We also receive mental health referrals from teachers, administrators, and counselors for students that are showing signs of anger, depression, psychosis, anxiety that could be affecting them academically, but not always affecting them, their behavior in school. But they're unable to focus on their academics. These courageous students attend school but suffer daily. So school social workers are invaluable to this type of student to be able to keep going. They, it's kind of like they're on the borderline between being able to receive those social work services through an IEP and through some other aspect. There are many parents who have told me themselves that logistically they're not able to provide these services or access these services for their child. And I've had parents who are willing to come and see me get that parent coaching for their child, because the transportation-wise or time with the job, they're not able to seek out that service. So the biggest concern is if we cut 4 social workers, it's going to mean adding other schools to the social workers that remain in the school system, making it more difficult to provide the services that these students need so desperately. The problems that these students are facing are not changing. So we would like you to please consider that. that their environments that they're stuck in continue to become more problematic for these children. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll give you a couple of minutes. Are you going to talk about the same service center?
I'd like to reiterate
Okay.
what Lindsay's saying. My name is Natalie Duff. I'm a school social worker. I've been a school social worker for 15 years, 6 of which have been in this parish. And I really just want to reiterate what she just said up here, because we faced cuts last year, and so it has limited what we can provide to students. And there are some legal things we have to provide. And she talked about IEP social work services as well as RTI behavior. And our parish policy says that our Tier 3 interventions are social work services. We are it. So the more that we cut, the more schools we're going to have to take on. And when the Tier 3 services means that if they're not done, and there's a lot that factors into that. Children are not going to get evaluated for special ed. They are not going to be considered to change placement if they need to get off of a campus. They always look back to us to see what interventions were done. And that is just a very small part of what we do. And Lindsay just told you all the other things we do. An example of that, I'll just tell you, I had a 3rd grader last week that we did a suicide assessment on. The guidance counselor called me because it was something way above what she felt comfortable doing. If we lose 4 more social workers, we're going to have a lot of schools, and our ability to be there when they need us is going to be very limited. So we just did want to speak on our own behalf, asking you to consider. I hear y'all talking about all this money that y'all put back in, not all of it, but you've put some back in, and we've talked about we put back in school safety officers. I believe that mental health services are just as important. We affect the classroom. I am called daily by teachers, text. They have me on speed dial to come and remove children. Come talk to them because they are having a meltdown in my classroom. Come and get them out because they have cuts down their arm. Those are the kinds of things we face. And I know maybe some people have said, we don't need social workers, they're a luxury. We've heard that more times than I can count, and it's very discouraging because all of us as a whole love what we do. We are very passionate and dedicated to the children of this parish, and she's right. A lot of parents can't afford services outside. We do a lot of referrals because there's no way that we can do it all. But we can't refer them all out because those counselors and doctors are not in our schools. When things are happening, we are the ones that are there, running those hallways daily. And so I'm asking you on behalf of my fellow social workers to please reconsider. Thank you.
Any other? Yes, sir, Mr. Hidalgo.
Yeah, since we backtrack to the 1200 series, I want to ask Dr. Aguilar, based on what we've heard tonight from the principals regarding the school security officers and based on what we just heard from the social workers, I just want to get some, maybe you can help me understand. I mean, it's unfortunate that it comes to this where, we're not trying to pit people against the other, but if we are working on a limited budget and we are looking to cut places and I think all agree we want to cut farther from the classroom rather than closer to the classroom. My question to you, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, I just maybe a logic here. Why would, you had school resource officers, 2 of them potentially cut in option 1, scenario 1. You had 6 school security officers as potential cuts in scenario 1. But in scenario 1 and 2, you have 4 social workers proposed to be cut. And my question is, is a school security officer handing out referrals in the hallway, as we heard tonight, more important than a social worker working with a student who has serious issues, it's more of a direct impact to the classroom? And I can tell you that I'm aware of many cases where these students cannot afford to get services outside of the school system. Now, we're not trying to be a nanny state. My question is, how did this get prioritized?
Okay, thank you. It was a very, very difficult process. Multiple versions of this consideration file went into this conversation about how do we protect the classroom to the extent possible, and how do we downsize the organization, being cognizant of what requirements are in terms of staffing by the board, also legal requirements. the decision to reduce the number of social workers, it was a difficult decision. That leaves us about 8 social workers in the general fund. They're covering now approximately 5 schools each. That's a tall order and a tough responsibility. We realize that. When you are downsizing the organization, you have to make tough decisions. It's not to say any one person or category of individuals is less important than another. We made a decision about reducing the number of assistant principals. Every one of those assistant principals we currently have was placed there because there was a need. And yet we realized, okay, we got to trim back the number of assistant principals. We looked at cutting a guidance counselor at a school. That guidance counselor was there because somebody felt there was a need at that school. Making decisions about how many special ed teachers we need to staff for next year. Very, very difficult for Mr. Thibodeau and his department to try to downsize. When it got down to social workers, we understand the ramifications of reducing the number of social workers by 4. We made the decision, if the board agrees that we are probably at the end of where we can reduce that part of our organization. So I understand it's difficult for you. We did spend time thinking about, could 8 social workers provide services to our children? Ideally, we would have 1 at every school, but we're not in that position. Just looking at the cost cutting that took place just this evening, I don't know what your intentions are with the money that is now available in the general fund. Through your efforts, by my calculations, you still are to the good of about $140,000 just in tonight's efforts, plus the $17,000 from supplies that I offered up at the beginning of the evening. You have the ability to add back 2 social workers to the general fund without changing the bottom line, if you so desire. It's whatever the board believes is most important. I would urge you, if you don't have specific plans for that $157,000, restore 2 of those social workers.
Well, I know, Mr. Superintendent, I do desire, so I am going to make a motion to restore 2 of the social workers back to the general fund.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor that we restore 2 social workers back from.
I will second.
And we have a second from Mr. Knezik. Any questions or other comments from members of the audience? Any questions from members of the board?
Just want to repeat myself one more time, Mr. President, that I'd like to see us cut as far from the classroom as possible, not as close. And I'll tell you, anyone working directly with a student is pretty close to the classroom to me. So that's my motivation. Thank you.
I have one question.
Yes, sir. Mr. Knezik?
Dr. Aguilar, during the appeals process, do you ever hear appeals for positions outside of direct instructional teachers?
So this is my first full cycle with staffing. I came in May. I know in the appeals listing that I've received to date, I already have a request to add back a French-speaking administrator. So yes, I believe I could add back a staff member through the appeal process if it warrants so.
I guess my secondary question is then, could we have, in lieu of adding the 2 now or all 4 back now, could they be added through the appeals process instead?
Well, obviously, yes, they could be added later, but I think the right place to be at this point is to be fiscally responsible, and if the budget can support at least returning 2, I think it would be the right thing to do for the district.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Centeni?
Certainly don't want to sound like I don't appreciate social workers, but this kind of seems a little bit to me like, what if there were 2 librarians that came up and spoke just now, or 2 PE pairs, or the dean of students, or the 3 custodians, or, it kind of seems like maybe we cut some money out of the budget and we're turning right back around and spending it. I would at least prefer to consider this a little more, and maybe take it back up at the next budget meeting, rather than trying to make a decision now. But certainly, whatever the majority would like to do.
Do we mean similar to the two principals who spoke on behalf of the resource officers, or similar to the two school board members who spoke on behalf of the science lab teachers?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote. Would you repeat the motion, please, just so that we all know what's...
Yes, that we restore 2 of the 4 social workers back to the general fund.
May I ask what the total cost is before we vote on this?
Yes, based on the information here.
So it's $150,000.
Yeah, I'm sorry, 150.
Adding it back.
Three for, 3 against.
Motion fails. Any other cost center summaries, Mr. Guidry?
No, sir, that concludes all of the cost center series.
This concludes all of the items on our agenda tonight.
Mr. Angel,
I'm sorry.
Did the board want to ratify that 10% reduction in supplies? If so, I think you should vote on that.
I move that we reduce office supplies outside of the schools by 10%.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Knizik. Yes, sir. Oh. Any questions or comments concerning this motion from members of the public? Members of the board? If not, Madam Secretary, we'll call for the vote.
Yeah.
Tomorrow. I met him once. Right there.
6 for, none against.
Motion carries. This concludes the items on the agenda. This meeting is adjourned. I'm sorry, Mr. Guidry?
Oh.
I'm sorry.
I was going to ask if we could have a motion to accept scenario 2 as revised and as provided for the separate motions that have been approved during the special board meeting.
Yes, we can do that. I'm declaring this meeting unadjourned.
And that'll cover all the other items that are listed.
Can we do a voice vote?
Yeah, we'll do it. Okay, you want to, the chair would accept a motion based on Mr. Guidry's suggestion.
I will make the motion as per Mr. Guidry's suggestion.
Why don't you say it again, Mr. Guidry? What?
Yes.
That the board accepts scenario 2 as modified.
The board accept scenario 2 as revised and as adjusted for the separate motions approved during the special board meeting.
And I'll second it.
As adjusted for the separate motions approved during the special board meeting.
Mr. Latchley, not only was he quick on the second, he got to the motion this time. He's got another meeting.
Six for, none against.
Okay.
Mr. Angel.
Yes, sir.
Just wanted to say a reminder to the board that we are having a special board meeting on May 31st. That's Tuesday, just before the June 1st regular school board meeting. The May 31st special board meeting is to consider the 2 charter applications.
Thank you. Once again, adjourned.
May 31st, it moved.